So guys, today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to regain your menstrual cycle coming out of a competition prep. So this one's going to be more aimed towards the females or any coaches, male coaches wanting to kind of learn how to navigate this process for your female clients. So firstly, when we think about how to regain your menstrual cycle after a competition prep, we first need to understand the process of why, it's been lost. And then we can start to reverse engineer that process of how to regain it. So essentially, one of the main reasons, and there's a few reasons why your body will downregulate those hormones responsible for the menstrual cycle. And a few of those reasons are contributing towards essentially why your body's given that up. Now, one of the main reasons is going to be down to stress on the body. So obviously stress from dieting, stress from being in a caloric deficit, stress from output through cardio, through expenditure, coupled with the fact that body fat is very low. So let's assume that, you've got yourself into extreme conditioning, body fat is getting lower and lower. And of course, cholesterol. So obviously all hormones derive from cholesterol. And when dietary fat and dietary cholesterol is low, this obviously induces that response as well. So when we look at the process of why the menstrual cycle will potentially downregulate as being a combination of those factors, we can then start to understand what we need to do to then reverse that process. Now, when we think about the body is a very clever adaptive mechanism. So the body will adapt to stimuli without us even realizing it or without us really wanting that to happen. So when we're in a dieting phase for a long period of time, the body essentially just wants to preserve energy. That's all it wants to do. It wants to preserve its energy. It wants to survive. It wants to be able to have all of the internal organs functioning sufficiently. It doesn't know that you're trying to prep for a bodybuilding show. So when it starts to notice that energy levels are getting lower and lower, fat reserves are getting lower and lower, and there's a high amount of stress on the body starts to realize that it's not a vessel which is going to be capable of conceiving, carrying and birthing a child. So that reproductive system is one of the energy mechanisms that will just downregulate. The body will say goodbye to that once it realizes that the female body is not in a position where it can carry a child. And that's just a way of your body, again, preserving energy. It starts to see that one of these processes, one of these mechanisms, which is now, not sufficient, it's not going to work. We don't need that anymore. And a way of preserving energy is actually downregulating that process. Because menstruation itself, ovulation in particular, ovulation obviously being where the body will release the egg ready for potential fertilization, and menstruation being obviously the shedding of the endometrium lining. If that process hasn't occurred, these two processes actually require a very, very high amount of energy from the human body. So by actually dispelling that process and just down-regulating that, your body then has a lot more energy to reserve for the pressure and the stress that you're accumulating throughout that prep. So if we understand that process, that stress on the body is the main reason why that cycle has gone, and also a combination of low body fat and also low overall dietary fat intake and cholesterol, we can then quite easily start to engineer that process of how we can get that cycle back. So say your peak diet, you finish your competition season, it's now a case of firstly reducing stress on the body. So the first thing I'll do with my female clients is start to actually reduce training volume and reduce output. Now, obviously when you've just finished your show season, you've got calories coming back in abundance, you're going to feel like you want to train, you're going to feel like your energy's high and you want to lift as much as you can. But what's really important to consider is that if we're trying to get that menstrual cycle back, we need to actually start reducing some of that stress. There's probably quite a good chance that throughout the back end of your dieting phase, cardio has been relatively high, expenditure has been high through steps, through training volume, and obviously the stress on the body from trying to obviously keep numbers up within your resistance training. So by actually tapering some of this back, we're starting to already reverse that process and just reduce that stress. So one thing I'll do with my clients is potentially pull them back to, 1 rep in reserve or 2 reps in reserve or even 3 reps in reserve in their training immediately post-show. And this might only be for the first week or the second week. What we'll look to do is maybe go 3 reps in reserve for week 1 and maybe just 1 top set in all movements. Then we'll pull back to full training volume in terms of the overall total sets, but pull them down to 2 reps in reserve. So we're still not quite going all the way. And then maybe 1, and then obviously back to full training capacity. And this will be different for everyone based upon the response. Another thing that I'd like to also do immediately post-show is actually run a full training deload. Now, this is something that, again, it'll be person dependent. Some people won't need this, some people won't want this, but a lot of the time we'll have maybe 3 or 4 or even a week away from training altogether before returning to that lower volume approach. Then we need to look at cardio. So this is where a lot of people go wrong, and a lot of people will start that reverse process but still keep cardio very, very high in a way to try and, combat some of the additional calories that's coming in and keep yourself very lean. But what we need to understand and appreciate post-show, if you're trying to get your menstrual cycle back, is that we actually need to get some calories up and we actually need to get some body fat back on. And a way of doing that, again, is reducing that output on the body and pulling that cardio down. Doesn't mean it needs to come out, but it certainly wants to be reduced. So say you finish your prep on 60 minutes cardio a day, let's maybe look to taper that down to 30 minutes or 25 minutes per day. So we've still got a little bit of expenditure in there to counteract some of the energy balance, but we're not hammering loads and loads of cardio and again, just reducing that stress on the body. Then we also need to consider obviously getting some body fat back down. Now, if you're looking to kind of reverse engineer and reverse diet, I've done another video on this previously, so have a look at that one. But essentially, let's say you're a bikini girl and you finished on 1,000 calories, which is not unheard of. You finish your diet on 1,000 calories, I would initially look to get 500-600 calories straight back down, so 50% of the calories. We're following that for maybe 3, 4, 5 days, maybe a week. Then we're looking to get another 50% on. Very quickly, you're down to 1,900, 200 calories. What we see a lot of the time is females adding 50 calories here, adding 50 calories there, trying to keep yourself very lean. And if you're doing that and your output's still high, essentially you're just still prolonging that diet. You're still in a deficit, you're still dieting. So what we need to do is get some calories in and get some body fat back down. And obviously this needs to be controlled. We don't want to go too far the other way. If we start to put on too much scale weight too fast, we're then creating another stress on the body. So we've got to be very tactful with our approach here and make sure we're getting a good amount of body fat back down. So the body's back in a position where, essentially body fat levels are in a good place, energy levels are back in a good place, and the body starts to realize, okay, this body now is going to be slightly more able to go through that reproduction process. So we want to get some body fat back down. And then coupled with those two factors of reducing stress and getting some weight back down, we also want to make sure we're increasing our dietary fat intake, and that's kind of the third pillar here. So a lot of the time in the prep phase, it's not going to be uncommon that in order to create that energy deficit, a lot of those calories are going to come from fats. Now, something I'll try and do with my female clients is keep dietary fats as high as we can for as long as we can and reduce food intake from carbohydrates. But we also need to be then careful with performance and make sure glycogen intake isn't too low and therefore affecting performance. So it's very much a balancing act, but there is going to be a higher chance that you're going to finish your diet on quite low dietary fat intake. So actually just getting some dietary fats back in there is going to help with the production of cholesterol. And obviously we know all hormones derive from cholesterol. The sex hormones in particular here, the ones we're speaking of, mainly being estrogen and progesterone. And if we want those guys to upregulate again and obviously support a healthy menstrual cycle, we need to get cholesterol levels back up, and that's going to come through dietary fat. Now, the main dietary fats we want to lean towards are going to be monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. So this is going to come for things such as your oily fish, your salmon, your nuts, your walnuts, your nut butters, avocados. All these dietary fats are going to be the ones that we want to try and lean towards as much as we can. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we can't have our off-plan meals and we can't have some of the foods that we've been craving, but we just got to keep that balance right. So a combination of these things, and we will always see their menstrual cycle return within a good period of time. But we have to obviously, appreciate that the human body is a very, very, weird and wonderful mechanism. And this process of getting something back, which is very delicately engineered in the first place, can sometimes take a little bit of time. So try not to stress. I know it's easier said than done, but try not to stress if it's taking you a month, 2 months, 3 months. It's not unheard of that it can take a few months for that menstrual cycle to come back. And again, this is going to vary from person to person in terms of your genetics, in terms of how long you've been dieting, how low calories finished, how high output finished, of course, your age, and a lot of different factors that coincide. But just to recap, guys, obviously, when we're thinking about regaining that cycle post-show, we have to first understand and appreciate why it's been lost in the first place. So your body very quickly adapts and realizes that your body is not able to carry or birth a child. Therefore, that process is down-regulated. So we need to reverse that process and basically tell our body we're fit and able now to carry a child, even if you're not ready for that. In order for that to come back, we need to trick our body into realizing we are now ready for that. So we reduce the stress on the body via less output, less cardio, less training volume for a good period of time. We increase body weight, scale weight, and obviously body fat. Get some body fat back down again. Get yourself in a position where you're healthy. and we increase our dietary cholesterol, our dietary fat, through monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats, therefore increasing our fat cells, our fat deposits, and therefore increasing our cholesterol, which is then going to help to elicit the response of upregulating estrogen and progesterone. And a combination of those two things, and just sit and wait and be patient. And that is pretty much it, guys, in terms of how to regain your cycle. Obviously quite a complex subject there, so if anyone does have any questions or concerns, or if you're someone going through the same process, always feel free to drop a message or leave a comment in the comments box below.